Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I am Jim Woolsey, the president of the Defense Acquisition University, and I'll be your chair for this panel today. I don't think there's any topic more important than the workforce. Yes, my job makes me biased about that, but I do have good company. The president's management agenda, priority number one, is strengthening and empowering the federal workforce. Secretary Austin has three priorities: defending the nation, succeeding through teamwork, and taking care of our people. And I can assure you from inside the Pentagon that Deputy Secretary Hicks spends a lot of time on workforce and workforce issues. And why not? Nothing gets done without the workforce. That's who makes things happen, writes the contracts, manages the programs, and does the work of acquisition. We've never asked more of them. We have a new kind of pacing threat, not the predictable, ponderous, symmetric threat of the Cold War, but something quite different. We have emerging threats that our workforce has to deal with. And I can tell you that they have done some amazing things in support of Ukraine. One person said they're breaking the laws of bureaucratic physics and doing some really great things in support of Ukraine there. They have to deal with emerging technologies, cyber, robotics, AI, and many more. There's a different kind of industrial base. Back in the old days, it was an industrial base consisting of large companies that knew how to work with us. Now it's really about commercial companies, commercial technologies that are in warfare. And commercial firms dominate R&D in our country like they never have before. Not only are they having to deal with new things, but things that are changing fast. We've made a lot of changes at DAU. We're asking a lot for the workforce to be adaptive and responsive, and we're radically changing how we teach and what we teach to keep up and help them succeed in this environment. But I'm not giving a paper today, so I'll stop talking about DAU. But I will say that a feature of DAU is that we're anxious to get ideas from everywhere. So I'm especially glad that we're having this conversation today. And I'm joined by panelists Bob Mortlock from NPS, Rene Rendon from NPS, and Eduardo Lopez from George Mason University. We will have a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and put your questions in whenever you like, but we will save the question and answer period for the end. And before that, each panelist will introduce themselves briefly and then proceed with their presentations. And I'd like Bob Mortlock to go first.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and share our thoughts. I'm going to give a presentation on thoughts about how the Department of Defense could really employ portfolio management. So let me share. And I will begin. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Mortlock, and it's a pleasure to talk to you today about program management versus portfolio management within defense acquisition. My co-author on this research was Professor Raymond Jones, here from the Naval Postgraduate School, along with three student researchers, United States Marine Corps majors, Major Stewart, Major Deitrich, and Major Reid. So why is this important? The Government Accountability Office has repeatedly mentioned that defense acquisitions for the last several decades is always a high-risk area for the Department of Defense. Despite these repeated warnings, very little progress has been made. The United States Congress has also repeatedly given the Department of Defense acquisition reform initiatives in the form of National Defense Authorization Act guidance to improve the acquisition workforce. In this case, in fiscal year 2020, the NDAA 2020 directed the Secretary of Defense to implement professional certification standards in the acquisition workforce and base those standards on third-party accredited, nationally, internationally recognized standards. The next year, the FY21 National Defense Authorization Act went a step further and established portfolio management as the required management process for defense acquisition programs to be implemented by the year 2023, and ordered the Secretary of Defense to again implement third-party accredited certification programs based on those internationally recognized standards. That's the basis or the motivation for this research. So the challenge here is, how does the Department of Defense and DoD acquisition in general move from a program-centric approach, which we have right now, to a portfolio-centric approach? We broke this research up into 3 research questions. The first was, we were going to do a gap analysis between the DoD Program Management Competency Standard and the Portfolio Management International Standards as directed in the National Defense Authorization Act. The second research question is where the DoD and Project Management Institute standards align with regard to competency standards. And finally, we did a study on what barriers exist to the implementation of those portfolio management standards within defense acquisition. So let's start off first with the industry standards. Since 1999, the Project Management Institute has had ANSI accredited standards that are internationally recognized and accepted. At the lowest level, there's Project Management Standard, or the PMBOK. At the program level, there's the Standard for Program Management. And the focus of this research, obviously because of the NDAA, is the Standard for Portfolio Management, which is associated with the Portfolio Management Professional Certification that you can achieve. What is that portfolio management standard? To understand that standard, we first have to appreciate the difference between projects, programs, and portfolios. Projects are temporary endeavors taken for a specific result. Programs are when you relate projects together and you can manage them in a coordinated way and obtain benefits that you could not achieve if you manage them individually. That's a program. And then portfolio is a collection of those that you can manage toward a strategic objective. And visually, this is kind of how it depicted, where you have a sample portfolio with a variety of programs, projects, or portfolios, and all of those share resources and stakeholders toward that common strategic objective. The standard for portfolio management is centered around the portfolio life cycle, with the initiation, planning, execution, and optimization phase of the life cycle, but then these performance domains that we will study. Within these five performance domains, then there are tasks. For example, in the strategic alignment domain, there are 8 tasks that are part of the competencies that are expected. In governance, there are these tasks that are expected to be mastered to master portfolio governance. Portfolio performance is measured by these tasks. Risk management is measured by these tasks. And finally, communications management is measured by these tasks. So these tasks within these domains form the basis of a competency standard. This is the competency standard we will use in this research. The next question is, what is the DoD competency standard which we will compare? And here listed is the DoD standard for project program management. It's broken down into 4 general career categories: acquisition management, business management, technical management, and executive leadership. And those 4 categories are further broken down into 18 units of competency, the bold categories here, 18 units of competency with 70 specific competencies. It's this alignment we will align and try to align and show a traceability between the tasks in the portfolio management standard and the specific competencies in the DoD Program Management Competency Standard. What were the results of our research? Well, they're shown here in a table format and color-coded. On the left-hand side are the specific tasks, and on the right-hand side here are the units of competency and then the specific competency showing an alignment. A fully aligned task to competency would be color-coded green. This shows no alignment between this task and the DoD standard. And then yellow is a partial alignment between the task and the DoD standard. So this is in the area of strategic alignment, domain 1. In the area of governance, we see no alignment between the tasks in the PMI portfolio standard and the DoD program management standard. In the area of portfolio performance, we see a partial alignment with some tasks fully aligned, one task partially aligned, and several tasks that are not aligned. In risk management, we see 3 tasks that are fully aligned and 3 tasks that are not aligned for a 50% alignment. And then in communications management, we see a full alignment between the tasks that are identified in the portfolio standard and competencies in the program management competency. We can summarize that alignment here, where we show, again, governance has a 0% alignment, and communications management has a 100% alignment between tasks and DoD competencies. What is also shown here is how much these areas are weighted in the portfolio management professional exam score, and how important the industry standard thinks those specific domains are when they test that standard. What we also did is we broke down and we studied, well, what is the root cause and why isn't there alignment? We defined a term called barrier to implementation. And some of those tasks were not aligned when we studied the root causes of the non-alignment, and there were very high barriers to implementation. And some had no barriers to implementation. And this is the breakdown between the task rating and whether or not we qualitatively analyzed and opined whether there were significant or not significant barriers to implementation. This is separate from the alignment, but correlated to the alignment. For example, communication in the area of communication management, there were no barriers to implementation. In the areas of governance, we saw significant barriers to implementation. And in the other 3 domains, we saw moderate barriers to implementation. The results are summarized here with both the alignment score of the tasks to the DoD standard, and then a barrier to implementation rating and average rating. And again, we see, for example, in the communication domain, 100% alignment with no barriers to implementation. And over here in governance, we see 0% alignment with significant barriers to implementation. So what are our conclusions? The conclusions are the answers that we tried to address, the research questions we tried to address with answers. Are there gaps in the DoD PM competency standards that must be addressed before the DoD can fully implement portfolio management as directed by the NDAA? We see significant gaps in the area of governance. We did not see evidence of definitions within the DoD for portfolio management authorities, roles, and responsibilities. A portfolio management plan would include authoritarian thresholds, risk objectives, key indicators, prioritization models, and escalation procedures, and we saw no evidence of those plans. We also saw significant gaps in the area of strategic alignment. The DoD does not have a structure in place, protocols or authorities or procedures to align portfolios with organizational or service goals that would allow the portfolio management to set prioritization criteria using decision-making and resulting in a portfolio roadmap to plan, budget, and execute to. The second research question was, where are the DoD and Project Management Institute aligned regarding competency standards? The DoD and the PMI standards were fully aligned in the areas of communications management. In the area of risk management was partially aligned. The DoD lacks standards for stovepipe programs to synchronize risk across adjacent programs. And in the area of portfolio performance, it was partially aligned, where the DoD lacks portfolio roadmaps to balance and optimize resource and analyze performance against strategic goals. The final question is, what barriers exist for portfolio management standards to be implemented within defense acquisition. And the primary barrier has to do, was in the governance domain, and it has to do with our understanding of the big A acquisition system. Right now, we have a program manager in the center being helped, of course, having a chain of command through the executive branch, being oversight by Congress and working with industry with contracts, managing cost, schedule, and performance. And we have these 3 decision support templates that help us. Altogether, this is called the Big A Acquisition Framework. These 3 decision support templates to help with schedule, we have the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, which is events driven. We have a resource allocation system, the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system, which is calendar driven. And then we have our needs driven system for requirements. The fact that these 3 decision support systems, requirements, resource allocation, and management are fundamentally driven differently, I think is the root cause of the barriers to implementation in the governance domain. So what are our recommendations? First, we think the DoD should consider portfolio manager as a distinct career field, requiring portfolio management professional certifications. Specifically, the DoD should consider moving from a program executive officer to a portfolio acquisition executive. The DoD should consider moving from an acquisition program baseline to an acquisition portfolio baseline for management. Additionally, the DoD should consider moving from program elements to portfolio elements. And finally, in the area of requirements, from program-specific capability development documents to portfolio requirement documents. Those are all our overall conclusions. I want to thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to your questions in the follow-up session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. That's obviously a subject of great interest to me. So I look forward to the Q&A and having more conversation with you. But it's so interesting to me, rather than start the Q&A now, we definitely have to move on or no one else get a chance to talk. But really interesting paper. Thank you. And next, I'd like to move to Rene Rendon for your paper.
Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending my research presentation on a CMS-based competency assessment of the DoD contracting workforce. My name is Rene Rendon. I'm an associate professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. My idea for this research originated a couple of years ago when the FY 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, in which Congress directed the DoD to implement a professional certification program for the acquisition workforce, and that certification program would be based on a national standard developed by a third-party accredited program. Later last year, the Director of Pricing and Contracting for the DoD established a new contracting workforce competency model based on the National Contract Management Association Contract Management Standard, CMS. So with that background, my idea was to use that new DoD contracting competency model and assess the contracting workforce's competency levels based on that new competency model. So the research purpose is to conduct a competency assessment on a population of the DoD contracting workforce using the new DoD contracting workforce competency model that is based on the NCMA CMS. My 2 research questions: based on the competency assessment, what are the contracting workforce's buyer proficiency ratings and seller knowledge ratings for the CMS competencies? And based on the assessment, what recommendations can be made for improving the contracting workforce competencies? I draw from 2 theoretical foundations. First is auditability theory, which states that organizations need to have an established and effective knowledge management system supporting its governance process and practices. And that knowledge management system should include components to include competent people, capable processes, and effective internal controls. So I'm drawn from the competent people aspect of auditability theory. I'm also drawn from competency theory, which states that individual and organizational performance is based on the essential competencies related to job tasks, and the underpinning essential task competencies results in superior performance. A conceptual framework that reflects my research, I'm using the NCMA CMS as a competency model to assess a portion of the DoD contracting workforce, looking specifically at proficiency in performing buyer's tasks and knowledge of seller's tasks. And based on that assessment, providing recommendations to that organization for competency development of its workforce. A few words about the NCMA contract management standard. Contract management standard is an industry standard that's accredited by a third party, specifically ANSI accredited. It was established through a job task analysis, peer review, and public comment validation. It ensures consensus, openness, lack of dominance, and a balance of interest. It also includes separate and distinct processes for pre-award, award, and post-award phases. This aspect of the CMS is different from the previous DoD contracting competency model. Another aspect of the CMS, which is different from the previous DoD competency model, is that the CMS includes life cycle phases and processes from both the buyer and the seller domains, from both the buyer and seller perspectives. The methodology used, it's a web-based competency assessment instrument. The competency items are aligned with the CMS for each pre-award, award, and post-award lifecycle phase, and includes items related to the buyer and seller domains. This is a second follow-up research. My first research was done on the Marine Corps Systems Command contracting workforce. In this specific research project, I'm conducting an assessment on the Marine Corps Expeditionary Contracting Platoons, the ECPs, and the Marine Corps Regional Contracting Offices, the RCOs. I'll refer to both of these entities as the Marine Corps Expeditionary Contracting Workforce. In terms of my demographics, the competency assessment instrument was sent to 100 contracting professionals within the expeditionary contracting workforce. The competency assessment was initiated by 41 contracting professionals who progressed through the contract competency instrument assessment. 33 of those contracting professionals completed the entire competency assessment. As you can see in table 1, almost half of the participants in the assessment were either level 1 or less in terms of the previous contracting certification level. And also you'll see that 83%, or the majority of the participants, had 8 years or less of contracting experience. In this chart, we see the average proficiency ratings on the buyer competencies. The buyer competencies are identified in the bottom of the chart, where we see some of the competencies: plan solicitation, request offer, price and cost analysis, and so forth. The numbers below the competencies on the bottom of the chart are the average proficiency ratings. The proficiency rating levels are identified in the box on the left side of the slide. As we can see from this chart, that all of the average proficiency ratings of this workforce range within the basic and intermediate proficiency rating levels. We also see that the highest proficiency rating is 3.47 for the request offer competency. And we also see the lowest proficiency rating is 2.09 for the managed disagreement competency item. Also, we see that the average proficiency ratings are higher in the pre-award competencies and lower in the post-award competencies, and specifically the lowest is in the award competency, in the award life cycle phase. So those are the average proficiency ratings on the buyer side. This slide shows the average knowledge ratings on the seller competencies. And just as in the previous slide, the seller competencies are listed on the bottom with planned sales, program or proposed offer, plan negotiation, select, source, and so forth. And the numbers below those competencies are the average knowledge ratings. Here we see that all of the competencies, or at least the majority of them, fall within the aware basic or the aware competency level. We also see that there's a consistency in the average knowledge ratings throughout all of the life cycle phases, pre-award, award, and post-award. We see that 3.04 is the highest knowledge rating, and that's for the plan negotiations competency. And once again, we see managed disagreement as the lowest knowledge rating with a 2.35. Overall, we see that the knowledge ratings for the seller competencies are lower than the proficiency ratings of the buyer competencies. So summarizing my findings, the proficiency ratings for the buyer competencies range within basic and intermediate levels, higher in pre-award, the lowest is in the award competencies. Managed disagreement has the lowest proficiency rating, followed by plan negotiations. On the seller competencies, these are knowledge ratings on the seller competencies. The knowledge ratings range predominantly within the aware level and relatively consistent throughout the contracting life cycle. As we saw in the buyer competencies, managed disagreement has the lowest knowledge rating, followed by managed subcontracts. Recommendations to the Marine Corps Expeditionary Contracting Workforce. For the buyer competencies, emphasize proficiency training on the managed disagreement and plan negotiations competencies. Training and education on resolving issues related to the solicitation, resolving issues related to source selection process through informal or formal means. Using critical thinking, problem-solving, decision-making, conflict resolution skills to resolve those issues. And also to emphasize training on the award and post-award competencies, specifically the tasks such as price and cost analysis, ensuring quality, and manage changes. Further recommendations to the Marine Corps Expeditionary Contracting Workforce was to emphasize knowledge of the seller's tasks throughout the contracting life cycle phases. As we saw in previous slides, that this contracting workforce's knowledge levels of the seller competencies was lower than the average proficiency ratings for the buyer competencies. So emphasizing knowledge of the seller's tasks throughout the contracting life cycle phases, specifically in the areas of prepare offer, manage disagreement, and manage subcontracts. And that summarizes my research presentation. If you're interested in further details, please read the proceedings paper. If you're interested in the previous assessment on Marco Syscom, there's a proceedings paper out there as well. Thank you.
And that's another one of great interest to me. So I look forward to that conversation, and probably after the chat today for both of you, I'd like to keep talking about those subjects, really core to important things we're doing. So thank you for that. And Eduardo is next. He's having a little audio trouble, so we will make sure things will adjust as we need to. It looks like he's on now. So Eduardo, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my screen share going and maximize this. Thank you very much to everybody for coming to see these presentations, and thank you for the invitation to be here. This work is basically about how one can construct a forecasting framework for careers in a large organization, and it is being applied to the acquisition workforce of the Army, for which I have the collaboration of the Director of Acquisition Career Management. Their office has participated integrally to this research, particularly Dr. Dan Stimson, Maisha Purcell, and Marco Nikita. And this work has been done with my graduate student, Frank Webb, at George Mason University. And so basically, I would like to give an idea of what's involved in trying to perform career modeling. And the first thing to know is, what is a career, right? From our standpoint, to understand a career, we understand a sequence of jobs that an individual will have over time. And so this is not a new idea in terms of research. People have been concerned with this for a long time, but it turns out that through all of the different approaches that have been developed, there is still a lot of lack of clarity in how one can understand the career, rather the job progression that an individual will see through their involvement with either a particular organization or across organizations and so on.
Eduardo, can you try to get your slides full screen? We're seeing kind of your presentation view. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, I see.
I'm not sure if it's the swap displays button at the top. And if
yes, I've actually just maximized my view, and that is what came up.
in your top left, hit play, where the stars are. Oh yeah, slideshow. That menu you were just in.
Let's see. This is I think the same view.
We'll just go with this. Thank you.
Unfortunately, sorry. All right, let me just take on from where I left. So in these various forms of conceptualizations of careers, some of which date back to even the 19th century, where you looked at apprenticeships as as part of crafts and so on. There's been a lot of approaches, and around the 1960s, people started to try and do proper forecasting of careers specifically. Before that, there was a literature on on manpower that started to make sure that organizations would have the personnel needed occupying the different rankings in their organization. Over time, things like conceptualizing careers in terms of the occupations that people perform by occupational codes, careers looked at from the standpoint of where an individual is located within an organization, so what sort of unit, and even careers looked at from the perspective of the entire workforce in a country. So, for instance, looking at the firms that they work at. So all of these approaches have been there, but all of these conceptualizations of careers always have some problems. So there's missing information, missing skills, missing tasks that the person is performing, et cetera, et cetera. So we must somehow develop a framework that allows us to see as much as we can without losing sight of the ultimate goal, which is to understand why people progress through their careers and how they do. In this particular approach that we're taking here, we are looking at occupations from the standpoint of careers, and that, careers from the standpoint of occupations in terms of what tasks they are performing on the basis of some occupational code. And also we're looking at the careers of people in terms of the units that they work at over time. You can do this in other ways. And so basically, one of the things that we are going to take advantage of is a representation of career progression that I have worked on in terms of firms in broad economies, and that is a network representation. And so in that network representation, we basically depart from the idea that knowing how people move around between careers allows us to create a network of an institution, of an economy as a whole. And that network allows us to then track people in a more organized way than assuming that every individual can take any job position and therefore create any career sequence that is possible entirely. So the way that this framework works is basically imagine that you have units in an organization, and these UICs, which are unit ID codes, for instance, you can see people making moves. But as you can see, for instance, in this representation, I'm just presenting 3 different units. And out of those, there's one of them that's repeated, unit number 3. And that allows us to somehow reconstruct people's movements in these organizations as a form of network. So you can see movements of people among the different units in an organization and then create a network representation. The key to that representation, though, is that it has to capture reality in the following way. If one sees transitions between units, then these transitions must be significant in that in the future, one would expect that an observed transition in the past is predictive of an observed transition in the future. This is essential for something like forecasting and modeling. If the data that you have from the past doesn't tell you anything about the future, then it's irrelevant to make such a representation. So in the past, we've done this kind of work for firms in entire economies. We've looked at Finland, we've looked at Mexico, and in both cases, we are able to create statistical tests that tell us when we can take the job changes observed in the past and assume that those job changes are giving us enough information for us to connect particular firms in an economy. When you deploy that into the Army acquisition workforce, you obtain the same sorts of results. And this plot right here, the key message is this is plotted over time for the acquisition workforce. But the key message to this is that once you have observed a career change between 2 units, the probability that you will observe another career change in that along that same pair of units is something between 5 to 30 or 40 times more likely than it would be predicted by some statistical model. And the statistical model that captures most of the properties of the workforce. So therefore, observed career changes in the past predict career changes in the future. So with that, we can have a visual representation here of the network of career changes in the Army acquisition workforce. And what our development for this project has been is that we have managed to make significant progress in what the details necessary are in order for that predictive model to be much more precise. And so the basic idea is that you would have a career sequence that takes the form of a set of places or steps that an individual is taking in that job sequence that they take. So this is represented from the standpoint of units that they work at. Again, we also look at occupational codes. And what we want to do is count careers that we observe. So I will show you a schematic of a set of careers. We want to count careers observed And we also want to count the careers that we model, and we want to compare those counts. So here, for instance, you can see a set of simple examples of careers, a particular career that has been seen to occur twice. This blue career has been observed once for this red, twice for this yellow, and once for this purple. So a model would want to reproduce such careers. And the question is, what does the model have to do? Every time an individual reaches one of these units, then they might have a choice. They can stay there, or they will continue to other units. And which units do they continue to? The typical approach for modeling currently has been to treat careers as memoryless. Once an individual reaches a unit, they will then change to other units just on the basis of flows, stock flows, without taking into account where they come from. But it's clear, for instance, that these sorts of careers tell you different stories. The blue career requires to pass through UICT, whereas the yellow careers do not. Therefore, there is a difference in what is happening along time. So once we introduce memory into career forecasting, we see marked performance improvements with the modeling that has been used up to this point. So in order to track performance or evaluate performance of our models, basically what we do is we compare the counts of observed careers versus the same careers coming out of our models. And so we're going to compare models without memory and models with memory that only remember the very last transition before the next transition occurs. Well, with that little bit of memory, we will see that there's a lot of performance improvement. And we use 3 different metrics. They track different things. The first one, called Jensen-Shannon divergence, tracks how many bits are necessary to take a set of careers modeled departing from a particular career stop and seeing how different the sets of careers coming out of the model and reality are. And so those differences are measured in basically computer bits. The less computer bits necessary to out of this, the less computer bits differentiating the careers, the better our models are. So if there are 0 bits of difference, then the models are perfect. Another way to compare careers is by measuring a particular career, dividing the number of times we see the career simulated by the number of times that we see the career in reality. And when that ratio is 1, then our model is perfect. And another metric that we use is simply not so much the Jensen-Shannon divergence counts not only the careers observed, but their frequencies. This Jacquard index counts only the collection of careers observed. Whether a career happens once or 100 times, it doesn't take so much that into account, but rather what it does is it says, if this blue circle tracks careers out of a model, and the red tracks the careers observed, and the purple is the intersection between those things, and then here the intersection is between both the modeled and the observed careers. If this ratio is 1, then again, the model is perfect. So here we see, on the vertical axis, we see count normalized so that it is a probability. And what we want to pay attention to here are simply the orange and the red, which are the differences between the model careers and the observed careers in this Jensen-Shannon divergence. And so here we're seeing the number of bits difference. When you have memory, you have this orange histogram, or probability distribution more formally. And when you have no memory, you see this other histogram. And the red histogram shifts to the right, which means that you need more information to describe the difference between the model and the observed. So the memory-less model performs worse. This is for a given occupation. This is an engineering occupation in the acquisition workforce. And this is for a given unit. And once again, the orange, which are careers modeled with one step of memory, they perform better than careers modeled with no memory. Here, we have that ratio for careers. And now this is beginning with people that start at occupational code 0802, again, an engineering occupation. Each point represents a career sequence. And the ideal case would be that each career sequence out of this code would be at 1, perfectly modeled. The red represents a model with memory, the blue represents a model with no memory. And the performance is relatively similar for this occupation, except that as you go to rarer and rarer careers, the no memory models start to perform worse. In paying attention to a unit instead of an occupation, you see that the model with memory is performing generally better than the blue model. And in particular, this dot right here represents a career that a model with memory produces, but a model without memory does not produce, hence the lack of a square being here. Finally, this is this Jacquard index that compares just simply the careers produced from a model with memory versus observation, and a model without memory versus observation. Each dot represents a starting occupation and the careers that come out of that occupation. And the location of the dot on the horizontal is the location based on the memory of the model. On the vertical is based on a model without memory. And what you can see is that our target is to get Jacquard indices that go to 1. If both the memory and no memory models were good, then they would lie right around here. But what you see is that the models without memory hardly ever go up in this index of the Jacquard index vertically. The model with memory is able to reach values of Jacquard index of up to 1, which means that individuals that begin with an occupation, all of the careers that they will pursue afterwards are captured by a model with memory. Here you have the same sort of analysis, but departing from particular units of the Army acquisition workforce. And once again, models without memory, we do have a few that perform well, but the majority of them perform very poorly. Whereas the memory model performs very well for most careers departing from this unit. Okay, so basically, let me get to my discussion and conclusion. So, although we are able to introduce an improvement to career modeling that is not out there in the literature with the idea of memory, we perform a lot better than what has been seen before. However, we still realize that we cannot capture careers properly in all cases. And part of this is that the data that is captured for careers is not perfect for career tracking. It's perfect for other purposes. It's perfect for HR, it's perfect for budgeting, et cetera, but it is definitely not targeted for career sequence tracking. So what we need in the future is actually to develop better ways of tracking careers. And by that, what we really mean is we need to capture information that tells us why people change careers from one step to the next. And that will probably involve understanding the skills that people have acquired, the skills that are required for the jobs that they will perform in the future, and other levels of information, such as even why units are hiring at given points in time. Because also a unit's ability to hire and a unit's desire to hire will be a driving factor in what careers get observed in an organization. So we're we're comfortable that we are progressing steadily to a very strong way to model and forecast careers, and we are able to forecast lots of these careers, and we're also able to identify odd ones that are capturing our interest as well. But there are a number of steps that need to be taken, and some of them can be driven by the DoD in thinking about how to better capture information regarding careers. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eduardo. Really important that we track careers and understand the workforce in this world we're in today. So I want to start off the questions with one for you, since you're on the line. What would it take for an organization to apply a model like this in terms of the amount of data you would need, the preconditions, the things you do? Have you thought about that?
The purpose of this particular exercise has been to indeed deploy a model that would be usable at the acquisition workforce of the Army. So, in fact, that is our practical goal, at least one of the goals. Of course, there's an academic goal here. We do want to understand careers broadly, but the data that is captured at the HR level helps. We just don't know that we are capturing everything properly. There is information that tells us about the nature of the HR action on a particular career. And some of that information is tracked in a way that is utilitarian, but not focused. And so it's utilitarian for HR, it's not focused for understanding careers. And so if we wanted to understand careers, we would then need to perhaps deploy guidelines in some of these categories that are already tracked. And that would probably be the fastest step to begin to produce information. At a longer term level, I think we need to start to think about surveying both the employer and the employees on what are the drivers for their evolution in their careers, so that we begin to understand this in a better way. The balance between very abstract tracking, which always involves this idea of things like you're at the beginning of the career or middle point of the career or late stage, those are too broad. And the information that comes directly from an HR database can sometimes be misleading, where we can see, for instance, the same job as in the same position with an organization, people come in and out of that. And it turns out that the next person that comes in looks nothing like the previous person. So that job in the HR system isn't for a person. It's for some budgeting item or some administrative item. We want to develop better data so that we can understand why the person is there, so that we can understand why the next person is going to come there.
Thank you for that. And I'll in the future, I'll provide an edge case for you. Your humble panel host started his career as an aerospace engineer in Marietta, Georgia, and ended up running a defense school. So when you get a model good enough to predict that, I'll be impressed.
There you go.
Really good work. Rene, there's a question, a popular question in there, got a lot of thumbs up about, and I was curious too. Was your method to have people self-assess their competencies?
Yes, it was the assessment instrument was a voluntary, anonymous instrument where each participant would self-assess their competency in the task order. And if I can share a backup slide here, let me. So these were the definitions for each proficiency rating and each knowledge rating. And as you can see, there's the definition for aware, basic, intermediate, advanced, expert, and not applicable for the proficiency ratings. So for example, aware says that I apply the competency in the simplest situations and requires close and extensive guidance. And then of course, each of the other proficiency rating levels have their own definition. So these definitions were provided to the participants, and they were asked to self-assess their competency in performing the job tasks. And I'm going to scroll down some more. And for example, here are the job tasks of the a buyer's proficiency items here. So the price or cost analysis, as you can see here, the average rating was an average of all of the competency assessments for these job tasks. And so this is, so these are the job tasks for each of the post-award phases, domains, administer contracts, ensure quality, manage subcontracts, manage changes. So the average ratings are the averages of each of the job tasks, and they were self-assessed using these definitions.
Trying to learn about what people need to know compared to what they do know is certainly a worthy exercise. And we're doing something now that can add to your research. We'll talk to you about it when we get some more data. So as you probably know, as part of the new contracting curriculum, the rebuild we did under Back to Basics, there's now an exam to get certified in contracting. We started delivering that in February. It's 150 questions and 3 hours long. So we're giving people a good chance to show their stuff. And when we get some data from that, we can come back to you and talk about the progress they're showing on the exams and see how that compares.
I think the biggest challenge for the contracting workforce is that the new standard adopted by DoD includes sellers' processes and seller competencies, and traditional contracts training doesn't focus on the seller side. It only focuses on the buyer side. Now, here at the Naval Postgraduate School, a lot of our professors have industry experience. So we do teach the seller side of contract management in addition to the buyer side. And to be effective and successful in contracting, you need to know what both sides are doing. And I think that's critical. And I think that's reflected in the NCMA contract management standard.
Yeah, it was an explicit addition, and we're glad that we had the chance to crosswalk with CMS, because the area where we added the most things due to that crosswalk that the NDA wanted us to do was in the area of the seller perspective. And we, not just DIU, all of us need to be thinking about the industry perspective in everything, from contracting officers up to the most senior leaders. And we work with them at all those levels and appreciate the work you do on that as well. Another breaking news thing that maybe for the audience, we're partially at least getting at some of the recommendations that you made, particularly in the area. You mentioned other things people need to learn, and you had post-award as one of the things you listed. One of the things we're doing at DAU is the credential program we built so that people can learn the things they need to learn depending on where their career is. Not everyone needs to do post-award contract management. Now we have a credential for that will allow the people who are going to do that work. As you pointed out, that's important. We've developed that tool so that people can get those special knowledges, as you pointed out. Important that we do that. I don't see any other questions for Rene, but please bring those in if you would like. So Bob, there's a couple of questions for you. You answered a couple of them, but I thought at least one of them we should go back to, and that is the funding question. That's going to be a tricky one given the 500 and some odd board of directors members we have up on the Hill. And one of the readers pointed out, I didn't realize this, that there was a discussion on Congress recently, and they're talking about how much they don't really like the software management color of money system we already piloted. So that's going to be a challenge for us in portfolio management, isn't it?
Yes, I definitely concur. I mean, the project on software, colorless money to manage software projects, is a good pilot project. I think the problem we have in any of these initiatives is doing the basic research and improving their effective, because we don't have a baseline. And so we can try these methods, but in the end, how do we actually prove that using colorless money gave capability to the warfighter better, gave them more performance, or we did it, under budget or faster, and without having those baselines to compare to? I think that's from a congressional oversight, they are just like, okay, well, prove to us that that you did do your job better and delivering at the speed of relevance. And we have an issue, I guess, on the DoD side of proving, validating and baselining our stuff and then proving that. But I think I answered Commander Hattery and Commander Pollock, but I think my recommendation would be not so much to focus on the congressional side, but to focus on DoD internal. And we do things that we can change to move toward a portfolio management approach incrementally. And that's things like budgeting by portfolio elements, establishing portfolio acquisition baselines. They would allow then the portfolio acquisition executive the flexibilities they need to move resources within their portfolio appropriately.
But wasn't the questioners, I thought what they were driving at was to manage budgets by portfolios, you'd have to get Congress to allow you to do that. I thought there was some skepticism in the question about that, which I got to admit I share.
Yeah. I mean, no, I don't think that's the case. I think we're empowered to do what we want, but it's on the program management side, it's a little bit more difficult because, again, we have various levels, a project, a program, or a portfolio. And within the DoD, we kind of just lump them all together, but they are not really the same. And we require different governance to manage them, and lumping them all together does us a disservice, I think.
Yeah, it is a tough nut. One of the things you said in the paper was that one of the things holding us back is a lack of consistent understanding in not just DoD, but in the private sector and academia about what constitutes portfolio management. Did you have a chance to see who's making some progress in that, other than your paper, of course? Because that is it means different things to different people, is what strikes me.
Yeah, we did not dive into that, but that's a great question, because some of our current program executive officers do act as portfolio managers, but they don't have the authorities and the responsibilities because they don't have a baseline or direct funding. So they operate at a different level of just oversight of different programs. And so that fundamental understanding of the difference between a portfolio and a program is the root cause of that kind of cloudiness, I think.
Yeah, I can certainly see why that's a challenge. Even within DoD, I see at least two different kinds of portfolios. One is a PEO kind of portfolio, and those tend to be programs that are related. So there'll be a PEO for missiles, or a PEO for tactical aircraft, or PEO soldier, doing things that are similar to each other. Another kind of portfolio that's emerging, OSD is implementing a kind of review process now called IAPR, Integrated Acquisition Portfolio Reviews. Those tend to be things that are related in a kill chain or a mission thread, like IAMD or GPS, or the different missions that we're trying to achieve. NC3 is another one. And the purpose there is to find things in that chain that will cause the whole chain to fail, that aren't getting enough attention. And it strikes me that even within DoD, what portfolio means can be different depending on the context. But I'm glad we're making progress in doing the IPRs. There's been a little bit of momentum there. And the differences I talked about are why our approach so far at DAU has been to do tailored and customizable training, especially at you pointed out the 402 level, the 4020 class. That's really tailored to the individual. So we'll get a chance to talk about portfolios depending on how he or she is working. So there's going to be some learning as we go along, as we figure out what portfolios mean and how they go forward.
Yeah, I concur. It's good insights. We could also leverage the certification that the Project Management Institute offers to get our folks at least internationally recognized as certified as portfolio management professionals.
Yeah, that was the thrust of your paper, and that makes sense. That what we'll have to do when we do that, and we at DAU we'll take information from everywhere and make good use of it. As we look at that, that same question comes up. What's different between portfolios in the private sector, which is what the PMI is based on, and in the DoD? And in a portfolio in the private sector, of course, money is the outcome goal, if you will. That's the metric that matters. And for us, it's a lot of different kinds of metrics. So there are differences certainly that we have to deal with as we apply that. But having a place to start it is really the right way to go. Any other questions from the audience? So I have a question for you, Bob, that's an ask. So you might know that we totally updated our program manager competencies to map to the PMI. We did that since your research started. So I'd like to talk to you about the new structure we built and see if how that changes what you're finding and how things turn out there. I'd be happy to have that discussion.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great collaboration because we've done some mappings and it depends on what you're mapping, which standard you're mapping to, right? The project management body of knowledge, the program standard, or the portfolio standard. And so what those mappings can do is it allows us to understand our vulnerabilities, and that's the vulnerabilities is where DAU can concentrate effective classes because the standard covers the other areas that are not vulnerabilities.
Yeah, we're anxious to do that. And we'll have to be changing and adapting all the time because the world is, for sure.
Yeah.
Does anybody else from the audience have any questions for our panelists? I don't think there's a rule that prevents us from giving some of the audience and the panelists some time back. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you panelists for the papers. I found them very interesting and really useful to think about our work in the most important subject, I'll just go ahead and say, the workforce. So thank you all for that, and I hope everyone has a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.